and it's on the edge, nearer than ever to the point of no return, and just wondering what we can do and how we can make a difference given such an overwhelming problem. This evening, we are fortunate to have Brian Sullivan from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology to talk about the positive actions we can take in response to the depressing reality of declining bird populations due to climate change, habitat loss, and other factors related to human impact on nature. Brian will share the ecosystem of tools Cornell is creating to involve a global community of birders to generate the best and most actionable science from the data, and to get this data into the hands of decision makers around the world, a collective effort to bend the curve for birds, biodiversity, and humanity. He will address how we can and are making a difference in this battle, and together we can measure the heartbeat of our planet through birds. Now, a little background. Brian has conducted field work on birds throughout North America for the past 30 years. His birding travels, photography, and field projects have taken him across North America to Central and South America, Australia, Antarctica, and the Arctic. Brian has written and consulted on various books, including popular and scientific literature on North American birds. He is co-author of the Peterson Guide to Bird Identification in 12 Steps, which is a great book. Offshore Sea Life ID Guide for both the East and the West Coasts, the Crosley ID Guide for Raptors, and the soon-to-be-released Princeton Guide to North American Birds. Brian is formerly a project leader for eBird at the Cornell Laboratory of Ornithology. He is co-creator of the groundbreaking Raptor ID app for mobile devices. He is currently digital publications lead at Information Science and manages the Birds of the World project at Cornell Lab. As you can conclude from that impressive list, Brian has been very involved in supporting birds for the past number of years. So please welcome Brian Sullivan, measuring the heartbeat of the planet through birds.
Thanks a lot for that intro, Kathy. I think I'm going to have to write a shorter bio next time. It's hard to live up to all that stuff these days. Let me see if this screen share works. Let's see. All right. Can you all see that? Somebody, Leo, can you give me a thumbs up if you can see that?
Yep, I can see that.
Thank you. All right. Well, for those of you who don't know me, I'm based actually in California. So I've been working for Cornell since 2005. I was living in California at the time when they posted this job for this thing called eBird, which at the time was, everybody was on dial-up connections. And for those of you who don't know, like Leo, a dial-up connection, the internet used to go through a phone. It was crazy in those days. But yeah, so they posted this job for eBird, and I actually moved from California in 2005 to New York and joined that team who was really trying to figure out, how do we create a set of tools that would engage the birding community and allow them to record or allow them to do what they love to do, which is watch birds, but ask them to do it in a slightly more structured way so that we could generate some science with it. And in those days, pretty much everybody thought we were nuts. I moved back out here to California in 2006. I'm based in Monterey now. And the argument I made was that the West Coast is full of birders, and California's got one of the biggest birder dense populations in the world. So my argument was we needed some boots on the ground here, and I ended up out here, and it's all been a pretty good success since then in terms of engagement and what we've been able to do. And this talk is we're about 20 years into this experiment now. And I really want to first thank everybody. I know a lot of you are using eBird today, both for your data entry, keeping your records, as well as for your bird information. Some of you probably use the Merlin Bird ID app, and maybe some of you use Birds of the World too. Your commitment to using these tools and this ecosystem has really allowed us to do some amazing things. So first, I want to thank everybody who's already using this stuff, for putting your trust in the lab over the years, because there was a long time there where I think a lot of people weren't too sure we were going to be able to pull this off. But this talk, we're sort of at an inflection point now. We've got, a lot of us have this sense of ecological grief, if you will, where all the news is bad all the time. Bird populations are in severe decline. Seems like no matter what we do, there's, the information that we get is just kind of worse and worse each year. So I wanted to talk a little bit before I get to what we do at the lab. I've given this talk a handful of times, and what I usually do is jump to just some beautiful pictures of birds that have been submitted to eBird and the Macaulay Library over the last 7 days, just from around the world. And the reason that I want to show you all these pictures is not because I'm trying to convince you that birds are beautiful, but that there's such an amazing diversity of birds out there that's still worth fighting for. Everything that we do, all the actions we take, all the time that we spend doing this, there's still a lot worth saving out there. So let's just take a tour quickly around planet Earth the last 7 days and look at some of these beautiful birds. This is the Regent honeyeater, one of the rarest of the Australian honeyeaters. Beautiful gray wagtail we'd all love to see here on the West Coast. This one was in Israel. Amazing ringed kingfisher plunging into the water. Purple gallinule in Costa Rica. An amassed flower piercer in Ecuador. An incredible shot of a short-eared owl, which we're all familiar with, but this is the old world short-eared owl taken in Spain. And then bringing it back to Washington, one of my favorite gulls of all time, the newly renamed short-billed gull. This bird sitting there in the rain, just pretty amazing shot. We've still got a lot to save, but if we look at the data, we're faced with some pretty stark declines right now. In the last, 50 years or so, we've seen a tremendous loss of biodiversity and bird populations. This is a graphic from a paper that was recently published in Science that shows this incredible 3 billion birds lost. And now with eBird and the models that we can generate, we have a much, much greater resolution on species population trends. And unfortunately, when we go through a bunch of these population trends, and just to orient you to these maps you're about to see, the red circles represent areas where the population is declining pretty intensely. And the bigger the red circles, the more abundant the bird once was there. So this is American kestrel, which you can see all throughout the Western United States, is pretty much across its entire range apart from the Caribbean, is just really in trouble, especially in the Great Plains and some of the more open areas of the West where this bird used to be common. This is Swainson's thrush we're all familiar with as birders in the West. And you can see in Washington, Oregon, that is our rufous, sort of russet-backed subspecies of Swainson's thrush. And then the olive-backed one that breeds in the boreal forest, also doing extremely poorly. The sharp-shinned hawk, our common small accipiter that migrates through our backyards every winter is not looking great either. In trouble basically everywhere that it winters. And then incredible birds like our tanagers, these birds that we go into the forest in the spring and we're delighted to hear their songs. We're hearing fewer and fewer of these as we move on through time. So these trend maps that you're looking at here, this is eBird data modeled only for the last 15 years. So everything that we've lost all the way up till 2005 isn't even represented on this map. So the pace of decline is pretty severe. So what can we do about this? And I think it's easy to sort of throw up our hands and feel a bit hopeless about it. But I think really, rather than close our eyes and ignore the problem, we really do have to open our eyes and look deeper and get more active. So the Cornell Lab of Ornithology over the years has come up with this relatively simple equation that basically starts with building our science and technology and engaging communities around the world. We think that if we can engage enough people and generate the best science, we can really achieve conservation at scale. So let's take a look at how we might do this. Let's start with science and technology. So in the last 20 years, the Cornell Labs really put a lot of resources and time into building this ecosystem of tools and services for birders and for scientists. So the Macaulay Library is a more than 100-year-old media archive that you can think of as a digital specimen collection. So every time you submit a photo to eBird or a sound or a video, it's archived in the Macaulay Library. eBird is a database of bird records that's geared toward birders. So it allows you to record what you see while you're in the field. It keeps track of all your birds, your life list, all that stuff. Obviously, all these tools are open and available anywhere around the world. Merlin is a pretty fancy bird identification app, and I'll dive into talking about that a little bit more later. And Birds of the World is an authoritative platform for ornithology. That's a synthesis of ornithological literature where researchers, students, conservation practitioners go to really get a sense of what's the most recent deep knowledge that's known about any bird in the world. So this ecosystem of services is kind of are the backbone of what we're doing at the Cornell Lab right now. And I want you to look at this map because it's pretty amazing. So this is a map basically from outer space of planet Earth, and all of these bright points on here are eBird checklist locations. So you can see the bright United States, Western Europe, India, the edges of Australia, parts of South America are pretty bright. All these tracks across the oceans are pelagic trips and cruises and research vessels and things like that. But every one of those points on this map represents a complete checklist of birds, which is when you go out birding, a complete checklist is a list of all the species that you saw to the best of your ability, and some effort information associated with that. We have mobile apps now for eBird that make it really easy to collect data in the field, so you don't have to worry about writing stuff down in notebooks and transposing it into the computer. Pretty much capture all that with a mobile device these days. But it's important to look at this map and think about, okay, where are the bright spots? That's where we have really dense data. And I'm going to come back to this map later, and we're going to talk about the blank spots on this map. So look at Northern Africa and Russia and the interior of Australia and things like that. There's a lot of dark areas on this map that we need to address. If you look at the growth of eBird over time, it's now the biggest biodiversity data set in the world. So it has about 1.6 billion observations. has about 1 million people using it around the world. We collect between about 20 and 35 million observations a month now. It's a pretty amazing juggernaut of a project, and I don't think there's any comparable biodiversity surface that we can look at in terms of like understanding life on planet Earth. I mean, birds are an amazing bioindicator, and eBird's giving us an eye into bird populations in a way that nothing else possibly could. And it's thanks to you all that that's possible. Birders like you all over the world are, spending your time and energy really pushing information into this database, and it's really making a difference. So Merlin, as I said, is this fancy bird identification app that has, really cool features to it. It's not just a basic bird ID where you get pictures and a little write-up and a map, but it has features like photo identification. So in 2015, we worked with various researchers around the US to figure out how to allow people to identify or upload photos into this thing, and then I use computer vision and artificial intelligence to identify these pictures. And, for a beginning birder who has a picture of a bird, it's an amazing resource at this point. It can identify almost every bird on the planet with a very high degree of accuracy, even pretty poor pictures. So they don't have to be perfect shots like you see of these Blackburnian warblers here. They can be quite poor and you'll still get a great answer. We really, pioneered with researchers from Google and Caltech and Cornell Tech, this process of, you can think of it as computer vision, where a computer is actually analyzing all the parts of an image and putting it through a convoluted neural net, which is just a fancy way of saying an AI-based sort of machine learning tool, to give you a classification or an answer. We've used that same process now to help people identify birds that they're hearing in the field. So Merlin has really fancy stuff happening in the modeling side inside the app. So you can actually turn this thing on your back porch in the morning, and it's listening to birds as you go and telling you what they are by analyzing the data and the spectrograms that it's generating in real time. So it's a pretty amazing experience, and Merlin Sound ID has really unlocked the joy of birding for a lot of people who, just didn't really think they didn't really think that they'd be birders, but somehow being able to turn on that phone and have Merlin kind of detect and identify the birds that are singing around you, it's really opened up birds to a lot of people. When we launched Sound ID in the summer of 2021, the downloads of Merlin went through the roof. So right now there's about 15 million people who have downloaded Merlin, which is something on par with like the New York Times. It's a hugely successful app, and Sound ID covers now 1,200 species all over the world and growing every day. So Birds of the World is the project that I work on a daily basis at the lab. And as I said, Birds of the World is it's a combination of several projects that used to exist online. One was called Birds of North America, another was Neotropical Birds, and one was called Handbook of Birds of the World Alive. And what we did was we took those three authoritative resources of life history information on birds, and we merged them together into one resource called Birds of the World. And we launched this project in March of 2020. And the backbone of Birds of the World are these really in-depth life history accounts for every species on the planet. You can jump in, and dig into now more than 11,000 species accounts in really deep detail. So each species count has, if it's a well-known bird, up to 70 articles that cover the various life history aspects of the bird. It's all referenced. So, if you're a researcher, conservation practitioner, federal agency biologist, or any of this stuff, This isn't Wikipedia. It's not AI-based, generated information that's not scientifically defensible. All this stuff is true and referenced and well-resourced. So it's an amazing place to go discover sort of the biodiversity of birds at your fingertips. We take the media that you all submit to eBird and Macaulay Library, and we embed that into the relevant places in Birds of the World with these curated media galleries. So those are always improving over time. And that includes not only photos, but also sounds and video. So you can jump in and really spend a lot of time exploring the birds of the world. It's really important to understand too that this platform, Birds of the World, is an amazing place to discover the science-based outputs that are being generated by eBird. So this happens to be a status and trends map for Swainson's thrush. And what you see on this map is it's the species full breeding range in red, and the migration range in yellow, and then the winter range in blue. And the darker reds represent more abundant populations of Swainson's thrush. And we can even embed these and play them so that you can watch these birds move across the continent on a weekly basis. Pretty amazing. Again, all of this stuff that you're seeing here is based on observational data gathered by birders just like you and turned into very high-tech models that allow us to basically generate surfaces that look like this for up to 5,000 birds now. And it's pretty amazing to have that kind of information at our fingertips when we're trying to do conservation planning and all those things. So we really envision these three big gears of data at the lab, kind of working together to power research and conservation on the ground now. The model that we have, it took us a while to figure this out, but the model's actually pretty simple. We really spend an awful lot of time trying to engage birders because we know that birders drive all of the information that's coming into this system through checklists. We spend a lot of time on the backbone of the data archive, the underpinnings of our technical systems and all that stuff to make sure that those data are protected and safe and curated properly, data quality, all those kinds of things. And then we create status and trends data products, which are then used by decision makers on the ground, not only, conservation practitioners and things like that, but as I said earlier, federal agencies and such now using the data. A good example of this is this surface on the left here is a surface of bald and golden eagles overlaid together. And this is a maximum relative abundance map. So the darker purples are the year-round maximum relative abundance of these two birds. And, when it gets down into the lighter yellows, that's where fewer of these birds are found. So Fish and Wildlife is now using this information on the ground when it's trying to assess things like where to put in new green energy developments like wind turbines and solar and things like that. We need that green energy infrastructure to go in, but we don't need it to go in places that are going to be really harmful for birds. So these kinds of surfaces that we can create now for a whole bunch of species are really enabling Fish and Wildlife and others to do really important work for bird conservation. Another really cool example of this is using data on golden eagles to try to identify areas where there's high concentrations of golden eagles, as well as high likelihood of interactions with power lines, which is a major cause of mortality for golden eagles in open country of the West. So we're actually working now with the power companies to overlay surfaces of golden eagle abundance with their surfaces that show the millions of power poles that they have on the landscape. So we can identify these areas that have high likelihood of negative interactions between birds and power lines, and have the basically have the power line companies or the power companies go out and prioritize those areas for retrofitting those poles first. They don't want to kill golden eagles for any number of reasons, and this is the best data they have now to get out there and try to stop it. So I've talked a little bit about the science and tech. I want to shift over into the community now and just give you a sense of how big the communities are around the world that are using these tools. And, you know, it's taken a long time to get this number of users, but there's a significant group of people involved with this. Pretty much everywhere you go in the world now, eBird has a lot of contributors and the data are pretty solid. Same thing for Merlin. You know, we've got people all over the world submitting tons and tons of data to eBird. It's really heartening to see the uptake of this over time. It's just been amazing for us at the lab to be able to see this. And you know, we're really focused now not only on individual contributors but working with partners globally, right? So we've got a couple hundred global partners on the ground at the lab, and these partners are really, really key to the success of eBird, Merlin, Birds of the World, and everything that we do. These partners, you know, we have a model where we basically work with them so that the ecosystem of tools and services that we build gets highly tailored to the local, the regional interest, so that those partners can engage the local birding community, make sure the outputs are really solid and useful from their perspective, and get that conservation happening on the ground. A good example of this is our partner Bird Count India, which has really been leveraging this full suite of Cornell Lab tools for about the last 10 years or so. If you look at, you know, the eBird participation in India, it's grown rapidly over time, thanks to Bird Count India basically taking the ball and running with it. They've done everything from, you know, engaging with the lab on sound identification, workshops, helping us build new tools for eBird and pilot those tools, like the recent eBird trip reports that have been launched. They field teams of authors who help update the species accounts in Birds of the World. So, you know, we have an in-house team of science editors at the Cornell Lab, but our partners at Bird Count India know the birds of India way better than we ever could. So we basically give them the tools to update the accounts on their own, and they just take the ball and run with it. We've generated conservation media products for our partners there. There's one, this one is about this bird called the greater adjutant, which is this really amazing stork that is a species of high conservation concern in India. And really importantly, you know, our partners on the ground have taken all of this stuff and generated India's first State of the Birds report. And those, you know, those reports are being looked at and used by the agencies on the ground in India that need to make decisions about bird populations and bird conservation measures. So that model with partners is really something we're seeking to replicate over and over again, as many times as we can across the planet. You know, I think the example with India is a perfect one where if we could replicate that in every country in the world, we might just have a shot at bending that curve. So what's next for this platform that we're building? Well, we think that, as I said earlier, you know, we're really focused on on activating an audience, right? And right now, I think we've done a pretty good job with the birding community, although we still have a long way to go. In the old days, I would have come up to Whidbey Island and given this presentation in person, and I would have asked how many people use eBird, and I bet still a lot of people in the group don't, for various reasons. So I think we've got a long way to go to reach saturation in the birding community. So we got work to do there. And I think we can design our tools and services to be a little bit more specific. One of the things that we're really excited about, though, is going beyond the traditional sort of hardcore birding community, which in this diagram is represented by the blue circle in the middle. The green circle represents 15 million people in the US alone that say they leave their yard to watch birds, specifically to go birding. And then 46 million people travel and are backyard and traveling bird watchers in the US. And then when you get outside birders and you get to outdoor enthusiasts, there's a really big audience ring there of, a third or more of the US population considers themselves outdoor enthusiasts. So if we're really going to bend that curve for birds and biodiversity, how do we get people that aren't already birders to become birders, and people who maybe go kayaking or running or surfing? How do we get those communities engaged in the kinds of things that we care about? So we're going to be building tools in the mobile space that are designed specifically toward those bigger target audiences. And we think if we can hit them, and I think we can, in the next 10 years, we should be able to do things like, if we grow eBird at its current rate, we'll have some 5.5 billion eBird observations by 2030. And just to give you a sense of Merlin users, 230 or so million globally by 2030. An incredible slug of media submissions. We're thinking a lot now about automated recording units and soundscapes and things like that. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. And honestly, we're really hoping to grow the Cornell Lab membership. Right now, we've got about 200,000 members, and we really would like more people to join. So this was my one pitch for, if you like the stuff the lab does, we are a membership-based organization, so please consider joining. If we do all this stuff, we'll have the power to model, just like I showed you for Swainson's Swainson's thrush. We'll be able to create these kinds of models for every bird on the planet. And we know that these models are going to be critical for bird conservation. We'll be able to generate trend maps and incredibly fine spatial and temporal resolution. This is an interesting one to look at because our western warbling vireo is doing really poorly, but the eastern subspecies is increasing. So there's some argument that these are actually two species, and the western ones winter in a different area from the eastern ones. So it's pretty amazing to see this kind of stark difference between the taxa, and we want to be able to do this for every bird in the world, and we want to be able to do it at really fine spatial and temporal scales. So not just in the US, but also in India and elsewhere. And this is where things get really interesting for us. We've made a lot of investment at the front end of artificial intelligence, as I showed you before, around computer vision, first with Merlin photo ID, and then later with sound ID in Merlin. We think that there are a lot of legs to pushing this even further. We think that the magic of sound ID is really going to allow us to engage a much broader community, and it'll allow us to generate data that we can bring into our workflow to add to the data that birders are already collecting. And it's important to understand that I'm not suggesting that we replace birders with machines. I'm suggesting that we augment them or add them together to create more data and better models for the future. This might seem like science fiction, but this is actually a working demo looking at the lab's bird feeder, where we are counting the number of birds in the video, the number of birds singing, and creating basically an eBird-like checklist based on what a video camera can see. It's pretty amazing technology. But back to my sort of eBird from outer space map, one of the challenges we have with eBird is this persistent data gaps, right? If we're really going to know bird populations really well, we have to fill those data gaps. And that's where we think using automated recording units and that artificial intelligence and sound ID approach could be really powerful. A lot of the places on this map that are dark are either there are no birders going there, and there probably won't be for a very long time, maybe never. Some of these regions are deserts, some are conflict regions, some are unsafe for other reasons. So we have to figure out how to get in there and understand what's going on with birds and biodiversity. We really think that this kind of approach, you're looking at Merlin's sound ID actually working as it does in the field. It's basically generating a picture of everything that's singing around you, and the model behind the scenes is using computer vision to look at that spectrogram and tell you what the sounds are. But if you can think about putting that technology in an automated device, it opens up a lot of possibilities. One of the things we want to do is integrate sound identification into the eBird checklist process. So enabling you to run eBird while you're in the field and sound ID together, so that it's kind of like having a digital assistant in your pocket to help you with the bird sounds, and really interlace those two applications more closely together. You can imagine, having an Apple Watch on your wrist like I do right now, and having that thing detect a bird and let you know that, there's a bird flying overhead that you haven't seen before. That seems crazy, but it's actually doable and pretty close. We can think about using this technology to introduce a whole new demographic of people to birds, right? You can think about some of the really popular apps right now are things like Calm, where people are using Calm for meditation and wellness and things like that. Well, you can imagine having like a coffee and bird song, app. It's not an app, but it could be just sort of a, part of an app like Merlin, where you can join a coffee and birdsong thing and sit there and let Merlin tell you what's singing around you. And it's just this sort of a lighter way to get people into birds and experiencing nature sort of for the first time. We're thinking a lot now too about really compressing that sound ID into devices that we might be able to slip on people's backpacks, or, on the back of a runner's, pack as they're just running out in places where birders don't normally go. Because sound ID works, passively, it's actually collecting data it could be collecting data in places where we're not getting it right now from birders. The most high profile, or the deepest example of these kinds of automated recording units are these Swift recorders and these deep sea type microphones that we can put out there and just generate streams of audio that come in that we can, extract bird sounds from and create data from. Those real-time detections can be used not only for birds, but you can think of it as a way we might be able to implement things like in a lot of places, particularly in Central South America, Africa, Asia, some of the parks and protected areas don't really have a lot of enforcement. So we can use ARUs to actually listen for things that aren't birds, like chainsaws, gunshots, things like that would alert people on the ground there to go check out something that could be happening. Part of the problem right now is a lot of these protected areas are protected on paper, but not in real life when you get out there. We can use Sound ID and other tools to help do things like make green energy installations smarter. So if Sound ID detects incoming birds, we can shut down wind turbines to avoid collisions. And already we're seeing some of our interesting technology be used to help a project called Lights Out, which I don't know if a lot of you know, but most birds migrate at night. Most warblers, sparrows, things like that, passerines. And at night, those birds are attracted to cities that have a lot of light. So one of the things we've done at the lab is we've been able to look at the sky using NexRad weather radars and quantify the number of birds that are coming across or through a region. We can actually say tonight is a high volume migration night in cities like Houston, Chicago. You know, they're actually dimming the lights in a lot of these buildings to prevent these kinds of collisions. So this idea of real-time information being fed to real-time action is really exciting for us moving forward. So when we think about conservation, you know, we're really focused right now on shifting our gears now from sort of a data in mentality to a data out mentality at the lab. We've got to get not only, you know, the stuff happening on the ground in the US, but everywhere around the world. We really feel like this simple idea of protecting what we have, restoring what we've lost, and then importantly, inspiring people to change the way they lead their lives and the way we lead our lives too is really important. So we've got a lot of ideas for how we might be able to do that if we can engage those broader audience rings that I mentioned before. We know we can't do this alone. We're just one organization that, you know, partners with many, many around the world. So please join us or your local conservation NGOs. It's really important to have this network of partners working together to help with this idea of bending the curve. You know, I showed this picture earlier and it's pretty sad, but we really do think that together, if we work hard enough and we have enough vision, we can reverse this decline over time. It's going to be a lot of work, and you know, I might be not here by the time it actually turns green and bends in the other direction, but I'm not giving up, and I hope you're not either, because the stuff we've done already together has been pretty amazing, and I think we can keep going and really affect change on the ground. So with that, I'll just say thank you, and please reach out to me with any questions if you have any, and I'd be happy to take some right now if everybody's not sleepy.
Well, I believe we have some comments certainly in the chat box. I don't know how many of them are actual questions, but anyway, one of them says, incredible work. Where does the funding come from to support these efforts?
Okay, well, the lab has several different streams of funding, and we get funds from membership. We get funds from philanthropic donors. We have research grants. We have some program income from some of the projects at the lab, but it's kind of it's a fairly diverse set of income that comes in, or revenue that comes into the lab. One of the
have questions.
Oh, sorry, somebody's not muted.
When you keep your mute on until you want to ask a question, please.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I was just going to say, one of the big misconceptions is that the Cornell Lab has really deep pockets because of the name Cornell, and we are affiliated with Cornell University, but we are an independent NGO that's kind of based at Cornell, but Cornell doesn't really give us money to run our projects. We have to do all of our own fundraising. So we are affiliated with Cornell, and that's a great thing for a number of reasons, but it's not a financial reason that we're we're based there.
Okay, somebody had their hand up and I lost the little notice of it. I can't remember who it was. Would you please come on and tell us who you are?
Yeah, I can see the hands up. I see Jerry.
I
Yeah.
have my hand up.
Go
Okay,
for
go ahead, Jerry.
I want to thank Brian for his work and impressive presentation on all of these issues. I intend to share it with friends of mine who live in other parts of the country. But I also was interested in something. I happened to pick up the New Yorker magazine at the library for the January 1st and 8th edition. And I don't know how many people know the journalist Jonathan Franzen, but he wrote an article that is a little scary called "The Cats of LA." And it's worth reading because apparently their motto is no kill. It's a no kill cat movement to keep cats who live outdoors from being killed. And it basically, he says the consequences belie the name of the organization. So, the only cats we've had, we've always kept indoors because of the impacts they might have on bird populations. But apparently in LA, there is a major movement to force the city into allowing all these outdoor cats. And I don't know what the impact of that would be, but it doesn't sound good. So.
Yeah, it's if there are three things that you could get people pretty stirred up about, it's politics, religion, and cats, I think. Because people that love cats, they really can get blinders on about this issue. And I'm just going to say, cats are bad for birds when they're outdoor cats. They kill a lot of birds. There's several, there's no denying it. People that say my cat doesn't kill birds, maybe it doesn't, but cats writ large kill millions of birds a year. There's a great book that was written by Pete Mara. It's called Cat Wars. And it explores, both sides of this issue, and it gives like a lot of hard data on it. It's a tough one. Birds have an uphill battle, and the more we can do to do things that are pretty simple, like keeping our cats indoors, would be helpful.
Right. Kathy Bauer.
Oh, I figured the cat conversation was going to go on for a while. Thanks, Brian. This is so interesting. This is Kathy Bauer. I wanted to ask you, I wanted to know more. This is probably a big question and maybe not right here, but I want to know more about how it is that you, and I don't even know what the word would be, make up for or account for or work around the really fun sound ID that Merlin is, that always makes so many errors. So is there we always ask this, is there some kind of algorithm that goes, oh yeah, that's probably not a loon in the tree, that's probably a flicker or whatever it is, but there's so many of them and we mostly laugh about it, but I'd love to hear from you about how you deal with that.
Yeah,
Thanks.
sure. Well, that's a good question. I think that we're not using Sound ID yet for generating things like automated checklists or, all the stuff that I said is coming in the future. We haven't cracked that nut yet, so Sound ID does very, very well when the model is trained on at least 150 recordings of the species, and the user has location services enabled in Merlin, right? So if you don't have location services enabled in Merlin, Sound ID is looking for a match across all those 2,000 species that it can identify, rather than just the ones that are likely around you. So the biggest thing that I would suggest for people who are seeing Merlin throwing some crazy suggestions, make sure first that you've got your location services set to on in Merlin so that it can work like it should, right? And frankly, I just had this discussion with folks from Merlin when I was in Ithaca this past week. I'm not sure why we let anybody use Sound ID without the location services on, but sometimes people just want that flexibility. So I would say double check that. Here in my yard in California, I rarely, if ever, have Merlin get one wrong. It's pretty amazing. I mean, it almost never throws anything wrong. Now, if you're, sometimes some of the other things that are interesting about Sound ID is right now it's not obvious, like some common birds, for example, turkey vulture. I mean, you don't go out and hear turkey vulture, right? But that's probably a bad example. But here's a good one from my local neck of the woods. We have elegant terns here, that as you guys do too. They come up in late summer and then they go back in the fall. Well, elegant tern isn't in the Merlin Sound ID model yet because we don't have 150 great recordings of them, and a model hadn't been trained on it. But royal tern is. So Merlin keeps thinking that the elegant terns are royal terns because elegant tern's not yet in the model, and royal tern's a pretty close match. So it's saying, that's what we think it is. But yeah, it's not super intuitive to the end user that a common bird like elegant tern isn't in the model yet. So I think Merlin has a ways to go to help people understand what it can do and what it can't do. And part of that is like user interface stuff. There's a lot of really cool stuff happening behind the scenes that you can't see right now. Like, there is a certainty level with every ID suggestion that it's giving you, but we're not showing the users that. So we probably should. I think we should. So there's changes like that we can make. And then once the models get better and better, then we'll be able to do some real science with it, like generating checklists and things like that, and processing these streams of audio that are coming in. There's a lot of research being done on this issue right now.
Thank you. And what it did do was engage all those people you were after, a bunch of people who weren't involved before. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it getting better and better, and the day that it doesn't make errors here.
Hey,
Great.
Gary.
So Brian, my concern is that our culture isn't really attached to place as a fundamental sense. And part of that is because we move about so much and we're detached from our life support system. So is there anything that you or your colleagues or your collaborators are doing to reach children in school?
Yeah, that's a good question. Reaching children is tough. It's hard, and illegal to reach children directly in the digital space, right? So we really have to rely on partners and actual on the ground bird walks, classroom, events and things like that, to reach kids who are, at a quite young age. A lot of kids find eBird and Merlin on their own, and that's okay. we do have a K through 12 program at the lab that has a curriculum, that's out there in thousands of schools, but it's really not enough, and I would say, kids vying for kids' attention today with something like birds, man, it's hard. I mean, kids, I have an 11-year-old daughter, and getting her to focus on going birding with me is pretty tough when she has, this amazing digital world to kind of experience too. So I think we've got work to do there, and I don't have a great answer for you. I think that it's going to continue to be a challenge with kids. I think when well, I'm struggling a little bit because just knowing kids, and how much that they respond to like this amazing virtual experience they're having with digital technology today. You take them out in nature, and I always tell my daughter, there's more strange and amazing things happening in our backyard than you could ever see in a video game or a show on, cartoon on TV. It's just, you really have to look. And it's just so hard to get them to do that. I think it takes really good educators and really special people to connect with kids at that early age now. So our goal at the lab is to try to make sure we're giving, building the right tools that can enable that. But, it really, I think, does take special people with hands-on time with kids, It's a long-winded answer. It's a long way of saying, I don't know how to reach them. I wish I could reach mine.
Thank you. One person said, when I listen to sound ID on Merlin, is that adding to the database as to location, etc.?
No, it doesn't. So Merlin is a bird identification app, right? So you can go out there and you can open up a species and you can play the sounds of a species. If you hit sound ID, however, it starts to generate a spectrogram. So it's making a sound recording in the background. You can save that sound recording and upload that to eBird. So if you have an eBird checklist going while you're out birding, you can make a sound ID recording with Merlin and then send that and upload that to eBird. If you did that, then you would be adding to the sort of sound archive. But Merlin is designed to keep those sound files on your phone for your personal use until you decide you want to contribute them. It's not pulling them automatically. And there's all kinds of reasons for that, right? Privacy issues like that. A lot of people leave sound ID running for like an hour, or more as they're just birding. So it's recording lots of human beings talking and things like that. So if you really wanted to take that file and upload it, you could bring it into your computer and then just clip out the sounds you wanted to upload and attach them that way. That's what I do. I was doing it tonight, as a matter of fact.
Okay. Joe LaPlace said that he has a haiku box bolted on their house that reports birdsong 24/7 to Cornell Lab. And I thought that was interesting.
Yeah. I don't know much about that particular project. I know that it's basically like an automated recording unit that's meant for your yard, right? So it is passively recording bird sounds. I'm not exactly sure how that sound gets back into the database at the lab, but it's a pretty cool and fun thing to see, if you can just see what birds are singing in your yard.
It's this is Joe. I'm not sure how it gets back either, but I know it does. And also you can open your haiku up, so to speak, to other haiku users. So you can look at what other haiku users around the country are hearing as well.
Mm-hmm.
But it definitely feels like a good thing to do to try to be a citizen scientist to us. Seems like the right move.
Yeah, we discovered that the golden crown kinglet is like the first bird that it hears every morning without fail. And, as the spring progresses, it gets like 5 minutes earlier every day.
That's cool.
It's a lot of
pretty
fun.
cool to hear all, to figure that stuff out.
Yeah, that's neat.
Thank you. One of our people listening said, "It is so sad, frustrating to know how important our citizen science contributions are, while remembering the many times I've tried to convert a sighting into an eBird report and failed. I'm a bit skeptical about automated sightings after seeing Merlin make things up. I wonder if eBird, quote, add a sighting, can be made any more user-friendly."
Yeah, I mean, so eBird, the eBird mobile app, I will say, has a bit of a steep learning curve. So when you fire that thing up, we're making a lot of assumptions about you as a birder. We're making assumptions that you understand, what a complete checklist is, how to identify birds and all that stuff. Over time, we can understand your expertise a little bit better, but actually generating an eBird checklist can feel like a little bit of work at first. There is a free Bird Academy course available online from the Cornell Lab. It's called eBirding Basics, I think. So you can go there and take that course, and we've actually shown that people that take that course contribute a lot more and a lot better data to eBird. It just walks you through the basics of how eBird works and what it means to do an eBird check. Yeah, eBird Essentials. Thanks, Kathy. It's really helpful. So that's sort of the eBird side. The Merlin side, one of the things that we are working on now at the lab is how to matriculate a Merlin user into eBird. Because right now it's like going from a tool that's really simple in Merlin, and then you hit kind of this like super steep wall with eBird when you get there, because it's not very inviting. So we're trying to figure out, how do we crosswalk these apps a little more intuitively? How do we create a better on-ramp for a beginning birder from Merlin to eBird when the time is right, and not just go from one to the other because you feel like you should, So we're working behind the scenes to try to smooth that out a little bit. But yeah, I mean, I've always said every observation is valuable. And I still believe that, incidental observations, just records of one bird in space and time, those are valuable for some types of things and some types of analyses. But eBird, all the stuff that I showed you, the models that we create, those really rely on complete checklists of birds, like effort-based information. And that's why the eBird mobile app is so handy at collecting that stuff for you. In the old days, we used to have to write everything in a field notebook like this and then go home and beaver away trying to type everything in, and GPS thing hanging around your neck, and it's all in the phone now. So it's great. It's getting easier, and I hope we can make it even easier moving forward.
Good. Let's see. Do my Merlin recordings auto upload to the eBird database? And I think you just answered that.
Yeah.
Excellent presentation and information, Brian. Thanks so much. Thank you for hosting. This is super interesting. Will this recording be available for me to share with friends, family, and colleagues? Is that okay? That we do that?
Okay by me, sure.
Okay. Question, please give examples of how the info is influencing world leaders for environmental protection?
Yeah, that's a good one. World leaders would be nice. We haven't quite hit that upper echelon yet, but I will say, you know, we're working now with a lot of the federal government agencies in the US, and they're using eBird model data, not the raw data, again, to really make decisions on the ground, right? And that includes Fish and Wildlife Service, BLM, Forest Service. You know, there's so much we can do now with these data models. And I think the highest profile case currently is the Fish and Wildlife Service using the eBird population estimates in their Eagle rule, which is about to be announced. It actually has been announced, but I guess somehow not finalized yet, but will be shortly. But when Fish and Wildlife basically is saying, this is the best information we have now on bald and golden eagle populations, and we're setting all of our regulations regionally around these population estimates, that's a vote of confidence for eBird and its model outputs that is really something to be proud of, because the Fish and Wildlife Service, it's kind of like it'll have a domino effect. As soon as a regulatory agency like Fish and Wildlife gives eBird the green light and starts using it, all of the other federal agencies will follow. We've already seen it, you know, we've already seen indications of that. And then a lot of decision makers in countries in Central and South America and elsewhere in the world are looking at the US agencies to see what they're using to make decisions. So it does have this big cascade. So now that we've got the door cracked open with Fish and Wildlife, you know, it's really important for us to maintain that relationship and work closely with them, make sure all of our tools and services are robust enough to allow Fish and Wildlife to do what it has to do, which is not only use the information for good common sense conservation planning, but this stuff has to stand up to litigation in the courtroom, because Fish and Wildlife's getting sued left and right every time they make a decision somebody doesn't like. So, you know, I'd say that's kind of the highest profile, and we look for more and more of that as we move forward.
We've had a lot of comments over in the chat box, and I hope you can see it. And if you can't, I will send it to you tomorrow, a copy of it tomorrow. But there have been a lot of comments. Gary, I understand your feeling that cats should be sent back to Egypt, but I just want you to know that there are those of us who are very conscientious about keeping our cats indoors. I would not let my cats outdoors, okay? All right.
They're devastating to islands.
Yeah, well, I'm not going to let mine out, so don't worry about it. They're here in the room with me, but they don't go outside with me. They watch the birds from the perch here. So that's it. Anybody else have another question?
So when I was with Audubon, we had a keep your cat indoors program, which is a Cornell program. Have you guys followed up with that at all? They have
Yeah, I mean, so Cats Indoors, I think, is an American Bird Conservancy program. But, you know, the lab stands with those organizations, you know, and all their suggestions about keeping cats indoors. And, you know, it's one of the easiest things we can do to prevent bird mortalities. You know, and there's some other ones too, like getting some very cheap and very easy to install kinds of non-reflective stuff on your windows. You know, there's a lot of stuff like that. American Bird Conservancy has a good handle on some of these common sense kind of things everyday people can do to protect birds. So yeah, I'd check that. I'd check their website. We have it at the lab too, but might be easier to find at ABC.
So
Yeah.
Brian, really appreciated this. I have a burning question though. Maybe two or three. What's the most interesting experience you've encountered using in your experience with eBird and Merlin and so on? And the follow-up is, what's your one or two favorite birds or birding experiences?
Wow. That's a let's see. I'll start with the favorite birds. I think my two favorite groups are raptors and seabirds. So my favorite raptor is red-tailed hawk, and just love that bird. Super variable, lots of subspecies, complexity. We see them every day. It's just a cool bird. I love them. And then seabirds, I like the Pterodroma petrels. I like to go offshore and see those birds up in high winds and, really, I don't know, there's just something about the way those birds fly, in the ocean that's hard to beat. So, it's in terms of like the most amazing thing with eBird and Merlin, I mean, having worked on this stuff now for 20 years, I'm just surprised that it actually worked. I'm surprised we're actually able to pull this off. It's quite when we started, in 2005, my job was kind of like a traveling salesman. I'd go around and meet with groups like yours one a week, all over the West, and Chris Wood was doing it in the East, and we were just really trying to convince people that this thing might work, and I'm not even sure we were sure at the time. We just knew that it was a great idea, and it's been really gratifying to see people put their trust in the lab. It's been gratifying that the lab has invested in it and built this amazing tech infrastructure around it and continues to. And now it seems like kind of a juggernaut, and it's really a model for what any scientist anywhere in the world would wish they had about any group of animals. It's birds are just giving us this window into nature and our ecosystem that I don't think we ever expected, or we couldn't have imagined. So I don't know. I'm really proud to be involved with the lab, and proud of eBird, and proud and humbled that everybody has taken it and run with it the way they have.
Thank you, Brian.
Mhm.
Sarah.
Well, since we're all here, I just wanted to take an opportunity, besides saying this has been a fascinating and fabulous program, to encourage us all to be willing to sacrifice a little of the clarity of our windows and really figure out exterior coverings. There's all kinds of, I put in links to American Bird Conservancy. It's very doable. And I happen to be the curator of our dead bird specimen collection. And I know we still have a lot of birds hitting our windows. And I really think that we can cut down on that. And I'm putting in a plea.
It is in the chat, everybody. It is there so that you can see it. There's one more here that you might be able to address for them. I'm curious to know, what are the greatest environmental threats to birds? We've noted wind turbines, power lines, cats. Are more wildfires due to climate change, aviation strikes, etc. major threats?
Yeah, habitat loss and conversion is a massive one. I mean, there's here in Monterey County, California, I've been here since 2006, and even in my short time here, we've lost so many great birding places. All of the rangeland that's near the coast has been converted to strawberries or artichokes or grapes, and we all love our strawberries and wine, but man, it's hard to see the habitat just disappearing. So, you know, it's habitat conversion by human beings, as well as habitat conversion and change due to climate change, you know, changing regimes like that. Direct impacts to birds from everything from, you know, like we talked about, human infrastructure, so power infrastructure, cats, it's window collisions. You know, I mean, there's so many things that birds are up against that I mean, it's amazing for me to even think that like lights at night would be something that would impact birds as much as they do. But think about like moths to a flame, right? Like right now, there's 150 moths on my windows here in my office. That's what birds do at night when they're migrating. They come into these lights because they've evolved for, you know, so long, these migrations with no light pollution. They're looking at stars and using all kinds of different, you know, signals from planet Earth to do what they do, which is amazing. And then we throw these insane amounts of light up into the atmosphere that it's almost unbelievable that we still have as many birds as we do. You know, there's so many big challenges that they face. But the more we learn, the more we can kind of mitigate these things, and the more people want to, you know. So I think it's heartening. Part of the reason I started the slide or presentation with the Bermuda petrel was the Bermuda petrel was thought to be extinct 300 years ago. And it was, you know, rediscovered late last century by a guy named David Wingate in Bermuda. And he saved that bird by understanding its biology, you know, creating burrows on that one island that it nested on. And they were actually out there and they came back and nested. And it's an amazing conservation story. So I'm heartened by some of the change that I've seen. I think if you look back to the state of even Monterey Bay, right, for the last 100 years, it's cleaner now than it's ever been in the last 100 years. And that's because a lot of people care about it and a lot of people are trying to make changes, and it's slow, but you know, we're at least moving in the right direction in some ways. So I'm hopeful that we can start to understand, like the microcosm of Monterey Bay was fairly easy to understand when they took out the sea otters, the whales, the sardines, the abalone. You know, all of these things had incredible impacts on the ecosystem that were cascading and easy to see. When you try to get people to understand something like climate change or bird populations at the global scale, harder to get your head wrapped around it, right? It's hard to feel like we could make a difference, but we really can. That's, you know, that's all we can do is just keep trying to move forward with it. So I don't even know where that ramble started, but I ended up somehow on Monterey Bay sardines. Sorry about that.
Francis, you have a question.
Yeah, no, thanks, Brian. I love that ramble. That was great. I have to say, I was one of those people 15 years ago that you sat down with and tried to explain what this eBird was all about. And I was also one of those skeptics that thought, you know, dialing up, how is this going to work? Who's going to do it? And it's just amazing to see how you and many, many others have taken this and where it's come to today. And I just really appreciate you coming and talking to our group today and sticking with this eBird thing over the many, many years. Thanks a lot.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate that. Yeah, it's been quite a ride.
Yeah, I'm sure it has been. Well, there's an awful lot in the chat, and I will send you all the chat and everything. And people, if you didn't get some information or something like that, write me a note and I'll get it to you as much as I can. If all of you can take yourselves off of mute and get your video back on again, we can thank thank Brian very much for meeting with us and sharing this with us. He has been just wonderful, and I'm really very happy to have had him.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank
Patty.
you.
Thanks,
Thank
thanks,
you,
Brian.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Thank you. Excellent program.
Oh, good.
Thanks.
I appreciate it very much. Thank you again.
Yeah, thank you, Patty. Thanks, Kathy, for the invite, and hope to see you again soon. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brian.
All right. Good
Bye.
night.
Night.
Good night.
Night.